The bright afternoon sun beat down on the quiet cul-de-sac as Karen strode across the neatly manicured lawn, her brow furrowed with determination. She marched straight up to the front door of the Johnson residence, her designer pumps clicking against the pristine sidewalk. "I know you're in there, Johnson," she shouted, pounding a perfectly manicured fist against the door. "Open up this instant." When there was no response, Karen's scowl deepened. She whirled around, her eyes scanning the neighborhood until they landed on a group of teenagers lounging on the Wilsons' front porch. "You there," she barked. "Did you see where the Johnsons went?" The teenagers exchanged a bemused glance, then one of them, a lanky boy with a shock of orange hair, drawled, "Maybe they're hiding from the HOA Nazi." Karen's face flushed with outrage. "I'll have you know I am the president of this homeowners association, young man, and I demand to know where the Johnsons have gone." The orange-haired boy just grinned, propping his feet up on the porch railing. "Beats me, lady. Maybe they got sick of your constant nagging and decided to skip town." Karen's fingers curled into tight fists at her sides. "Well, I'll just have to find myself," she huffed, turning on her heel and marching back down the driveway. As she walked, she pulled her phone from the pocket of her slim-fitting pencil skirt, quickly dialing a number. "Douglas, it's Karen. I need you and the rest of the HOA patrol down at the Johnson residence immediately. Those troublemakers are up to something, I just know it." A few minutes later, a black SUV pulled up to the curb, and two burly men in security uniforms emerged. "What seems to be the problem, ma'am?" one of them asked, his voice gruff. "The Johnsons are nowhere to be found, and I suspect they're in violation of our neighborhood covenants," Karen declared, hands on her hips. "I need you to go in there and bring them out immediately." The two men exchanged a glance, then the taller one shrugged. "Lead the way, ma'am." Karen strode up to the front door, the two HOA officers flanking her. She pounded on the door again, her face a mask of righteous indignation. "Johnson, this is the Homeowners Association. Open up." When there was still no response, Karen nodded sharply. "Break it down." The taller of the two men stepped forward, ramming his shoulder against the door. It splintered and crashed open, and the three of them surged into the home. "Johnson," Karen shouted, her voice echoing through the empty foyer. "Where are you?" She marched through the house, the two officers trailing behind her. But as they reached the living room, a sudden movement caught her eye. There, cowering behind the sofa, was a young boy, no more than 10 years old. He stared up at them with wide, terrified eyes. Karen's triumphant expression shifted to one of confusion. "Where are your parents, child?" she demanded. The boy opened his mouth, but before he could respond, a deep, authoritative voice boomed from the hallway. What the hell is going on here? Karen whirled around to see a tall, imposing figure striding towards them. It was Police Chief Johnson, his brow furrowed and his jaw set in a hard line. "Chief Johnson," Karen exclaimed, her voice wavering slightly. We were looking for your family. They seem to have vanished, and I suspect they're in violation of the neighborhood covenants." The chief's eyes narrowed dangerously. "My family is out of town for the day, and I'll thank you to get your goons out of my house right now." Karen's face flushed with indignation. "Goons? These are officers of the Homeowners Association, here to enforce our community rules." "Rules," the chief scoffed. "Last time I checked, breaking and entering wasn't part of the HOA's jurisdiction." He turned to the two men. "You two, out of my house. Now." The taller of the two men stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Now hold on a minute, Chief. We've got a duty to uphold the standards of this neighborhood. And if the Johnsons are in violation, I said get out." The chief roared, his voice booming through the house. He reached for his holster, and the two men hastily retreated, hands raised. Karen watched the scene with growing panic. This was not how this was supposed to go. "Chief Johnson, surely we can talk about this." "Talk," the chief interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "The only talking that's going to happen is me telling the mayor exactly what kind of jackbooted thugs you've got running around in my neighborhood." Karen's mouth snapped shut, her face burning with humiliation. She glanced around, trying to regain her composure when her gaze fell on the cowering boy behind the sofa. "And just who is this?" she demanded, a calculating gleam in her eye. The chief's expression darkened. "That's my son, you nosy harpy. And if you or any of your officers so much as lay a finger on him, I'll have you all arrested for breaking and entering and assault on a minor. Do I make myself clear?" Karen's lips thinned into a tight line. She could feel the situation slipping through her fingers, and her usual confidence was faltering. "This isn't over, Chief Johnson," she spat, before turning on her heel and storming out of the house, the two HOA officers trailing behind her. As the sound of the front door slamming echoed through the neighborhood, the chief let out a weary sigh and knelt down beside his son. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked, his voice gentle. The boy nodded, his eyes still wide with fear. "What was that all about, Dad?" The chief shook his head, a rueful smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Just another day in the life of the neighborhood tyrant, I'm afraid." Back at her immaculate home, Karen paced the length of her living room, her brow furrowed in a deep scowl. The nerve of that oaf, Chief Johnson, to defy her authority like that. She paused in front of the fireplace, where a row of framed photographs lined the mantel. Her gaze settled on a group shot taken at the annual HOA picnic. There she was, surrounded by the other members of the association's board, all of them beaming proudly. Karen's lips curled into a determined smile. These were her people, her allies. Surely they would understand the gravity of the situation and rally to her aid. Crossing the room, she snatched up the phone and began dialing. One by one, she called each of the board members, her voice dripping with outrage as she recounted the events at the Johnson household. "Can you believe the audacity of that man?" she fumed to Marcia, the treasurer. "Threatening our officers and manhandling his own child. Something must be done." Marcia's response was immediate. "Absolutely, Karen. This is an egregious violation of our community standards. We'll need to convene an emergency meeting to discuss appropriate disciplinary action." Karen nodded, her eyes gleaming. "Excellent. I'll send out the invitations right away. I want every single board member there. Do you understand?" "Of course, Karen," Marcia assured her. "We'll get this sorted out. You have my word." Karen hung up the phone, the beginnings of a triumphant smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. With the full force of the HOA board behind her, there was no way Chief Johnson could stand in her way. She crossed back to the mantel, her gaze once again falling from the group photo. "You'll see, my friends," she murmured, her voice tinged with a dark, determined edge. "Justice will be served." Turning on her heel, she strode out of the room, already mentally preparing for the showdown to come. The air was thick with tension as the members of the HOA board filed into the community center, their expressions ranging from grim determination to barely concealed excitement. Karen stood at the head of the long table, her posture ramrod straight, a confident smile playing on her lips. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice clear and authoritative. "As you know, we have a serious situation on our hands, one that threatens the very fabric of our beloved community." She paused, allowing her words to sink in, before continuing. "Earlier today, I personally witnessed a blatant violation of our neighborhood covenants by the Johnson family. Not only did they abandon their property, but they also had the audacity to resist our attempts to enforce the rules." A murmur of outrage rippled through the room, and Karen held up a hand to silence them. But that's not all. When our officers attempted to investigate the matter, they were met with physical aggression and threats from none other than Police Chief Johnson himself. This time, the murmurs gave way to a chorus of gasps and exclamations. Karen allowed the chaos to build for a moment before raising her voice once more. "Clearly, we are dealing with a rogue element in our community, one who thinks he can operate above the law. Well, I say we show him just how wrong he is." She leaned forward, her gaze sweeping the table. "I motion that we take immediate disciplinary action against the Johnson family, including fines, a formal reprimand, and potential expulsion from the association." A hush fell over the room as the board members exchanged glances, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on them. Finally, Marcia, the treasurer, cleared her throat. Karen, I understand your concerns, but don't you think we should hear from Chief Johnson himself before making any rash decisions? She asked, her voice tentative. Karen's eyes narrowed, and she fixed Marcia with a steely glare. Rash decisions? Marcia, this is a matter of upholding the very standards that our community was built upon. Chief Johnson has made his position quite clear. He believes he is above the rules. We cannot allow that to stand. The rest of the board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their expressions uncertain. Karen could feel her control slipping, and she knew she needed to regain the momentum. So, who's with me? She demanded, her gaze sweeping the table. Who's willing to stand up and defend the integrity of our neighborhood? Slowly, one by one, the board members raised their hands, their faces set with determination. Karen allowed herself a triumphant smile. The die had been cast, and there was no turning back now. As the meeting adjourned, Karen strode out of the community center, her head held high. She had secured the full backing of the HOA board, and now it was time to put their plan into action. Climbing into her sleek, black sedan, she quickly dialed a number on her phone. Douglas, it's me. Gather the rest of the patrol and meet me at the Johnson residence. We've got work to do. Within minutes, the black SUV from earlier pulled up alongside Karen's car, and the two burly officers stepped out. What's the situation, Mom? Douglas asked, his brow furrowed. The situation is that the Johnson family is in flagrant violation of our neighborhood covenants, and we're going to put a stop to it, Karen declared, her voice laced with determination. The HOA board has authorized disciplinary action, and we're going to make sure they comply. Douglas nodded, a grim expression on his face. You got it, boss. Let's do this. The small caravan made its way to the Johnson residence, Karen's fingers drumming impatiently on the steering wheel the entire time. As they pulled up to the curb, you could see the chief's police cruiser parked in the driveway, and her lips curled into a triumphant smile. All right, men, she said, turning to the two officers. Let's show these Johnsons who's in charge around here. The three of them marched up to the front door, and Karen pounded on it relentlessly. Johnson, open up. This is the Homeowners Association. After a moment, the door swung open, and there stood the chief, his expression dark and unwavering. What do you want, Karen? He growled. We're here to enforce the neighborhood covenants, Karen declared, chin held high. The HOA board has issued a formal reprimand against your family, and we're here to ensure you comply. The chief's eyes narrowed, and he stepped out onto the porch, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I already told you once, Karen, get off my property. You and your goons have no business here. Karen's eyes flashed with anger, and she gestured to the two officers. Gentlemen, please escort the chief back inside so we can conduct our investigation. Douglas and his partner moved forward, their hands reaching for their belts. But before they could make a move, a voice rang out from behind the chief. Dad, what's going on? Everyone turned to see the chief's young son standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with fear. The chief's expression softened for a moment, and he placed a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. It's all right, son, he said, his voice low and reassuring. These people are just leaving. Karen's lips curled into a cruel smile. Oh, I don't think so, Chief. We've only just begun. The tension in the air was palpable as the standoff continued on the Johnsons' doorstep. Karen stood, her arms crossed defiantly, the two HOA officers flanking her like menacing bodyguards. I'll say this one more time, Karen. The chief growled, his voice low and dangerous. Get off my property before I have you all arrested for trespassing. Arrest us. Karen scoffed, her eyes narrowing. I think you'll find that we have the full authority of the Homeowners Association behind us, Chief. And we're not going anywhere until we've conducted a thorough investigation into your family's blatant disregard for our community standards. The chief's jaw tightened, and he instinctively moved to shield his son from view. This has nothing to do with my son. Your beef is with me, so leave him out of it. Karen's lips curled into a cruel smile. Oh, I'm afraid it does have everything to do with your son, Chief. After all, he is a member of this community, and he is subject to the same rules and regulations as everyone else. The chief's eyes widened, and he took a step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "You leave my son alone, you." "Dad, please," the boy cried, his voice trembling. "Don't fight them. I don't want anyone to get hurt." The chief's expression softened, and he turned to place a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "It's going to be okay, buddy. I won't let them hurt you, I promise." Karen seized the opportunity, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "How touching, Chief. But surely you don't want your son to grow up thinking it's acceptable to ignore the rules, do you?" The chief's head snapped back towards Karen, his eyes blazing with fury. "You leave my son out of this, you twisted harpy. This is between you and me, and I won't let you use him as a pawn in your sick little power play." Karen's smile only widened. "Oh, but I'm afraid it's too late for that, Chief. You see, the Homeowners Association has taken a keen interest in your family's well-being, and we're not going to rest until we've ensured that everyone is following the rules." She turned to the two officers, her voice authoritative. "Douglas, take the boy into custody. We'll need to question him as part of our investigation." The chief's face drained of color, and he stepped in front of his son, chilling him with his body. "Over my dead body," he growled, his hand reaching for his holster. Karen's eyes widened, and she quickly raised a hand. Now, Chief, let's not do anything rash. We're all civilized people here, aren't we?" The chief's response was to yank his gun from its holster, leveling it at the two officers. "I'm giving you one last warning, Karen. Get off my property, or I'll make sure you regret the day you ever set foot in this neighborhood." Karen's confident facade began to crumble, and she took a step back, her eyes darting nervously between the chief and his drawn weapon. "This isn't over, Johnson," she spat before turning and hurrying back to her car, the two officers scrambling to follow. As the HOA vehicles peeled out of the driveway, the chief let out a shaky breath, holstering his weapon and pulling his son into a tight embrace. "It's okay, buddy," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe now." In the aftermath of the confrontation, the Johnson household fell into an uneasy silence. Chief Johnson paced the living room, his brow furrowed in deep thought, while his son sat huddled on the couch, his eyes downcast. Finally, the chief sighed and sank into the armchair across from his son. "I'm sorry you had to see that kiddo," he said, his voice low and heavy with regret. The boy looked up, his gaze meeting his father's. "What's going to happen now, Dad?" he asked, his voice small and tremulous. The chief reached out and placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Don't worry, son. I'm not going to let that crazy HOA lady or her goons hurt you. I'll do whatever it takes to protect the family." The boy nodded, but the worry in his eyes remained. "I know you'll try, Dad. But what if they come back? What if they try to?" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought, and the chief felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him. "Hey, listen to me," he said, his voice firm. "I'm the police chief of this town, and I'm not going to let anyone, not even the HOA, threaten my family. We're going to get through this, okay?" The boy nodded again, a small, uncertain smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Okay, Dad." The chief returned the smile, then rose from his chair, his expression hardening. "In the meantime, I need to make a few calls. This has gone on long enough, and it's time I put a stop to it." He crossed the room to the phone, his fingers already dialing a familiar number. As the line connected, his voice took on a determined edge. "Mayor Daniels, this is Chief Johnson. We need to talk about the Homeowners Association and their recent actions." Meanwhile, across town, Karen paced the length of her living room, her mind racing. The confrontation with the chief had not gone as planned, and she could feel her carefully constructed plan unraveling. "This isn't over," she muttered to herself, her hands clenching into tight fists. "I won't let that oaf Johnson and his brat ruin everything I've worked for." Reaching for the phone, she quickly dialed a number, her voice sharp and authoritative. "Douglas, get the rest of the patrol together. We're going back to the Johnson residence, and this time, we're not leaving until we get what we want." Darkness had fallen over the quiet neighborhood by the time the black SUV pulled up to the curb, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Karen stepped out, her expression a mask of grim determination, the two HOA officers flanking her. "All right, men," she said, her voice low and intense. "This is it. We're going to show the Johnsons who's really in charge around here." The three of them marched up to the front door, and Karen pounded on it relentlessly. "Johnson, open up. This is the Homeowners Association." After a moment, the door swung open, and there stood the chief, his face set in a hard line. "I thought I made it clear, Karen, get off my property. And I thought I made it clear that we're not going anywhere until we've dealt with the situation," Karen retorted, her eyes narrowing. "Now where is your son? We need to question him as part of our investigation." The chief's expression darkened, and he took a step forward, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. "I warned you, Karen. Leave my son out of this, or I'll—" But before he could finish his sentence, a voice rang out from behind him. "Dad, what's going on?" The chief whirled around to see his son standing in the hallway, his eyes wide with fear. In that moment, Karen seized her opportunity. "There he is," she exclaimed, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. "Officers, apprehend the boy immediately." The two officers surged forward, but the chief was faster. He stepped in front of his son, shielding him with his body, his hand gripping the pistol in his holster. "I said, leave him alone." The chief roared, and in one swift motion, he drew his weapon and leveled it at the two men. Karen's eyes widened, and she took a hasty step back, her hands raised in a placating gesture. "Now, chief, let's not do anything rash here. We're all reasonable people, aren't we?" The chief's expression was one of pure fury. "Reasonable? You and your goons break into my home, threaten my son, and you expect me to be reasonable?" He shook his head, his grip on the gun unwavering. "I'm done playing by your rules, Karen. It's time you learned that you're not the only one with power in this town." Karen's face flushed with anger, and she opened her mouth to retort. But before she could, the sound of sirens pierced the night air. The chief's lips curved into a grim smile. "Looks like my backup is here," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "I called the mayor and the city council, Karen. They're not too happy about your little power trip, and they've ordered you and your officers to stand down." Karen's face paled, and she shot a panicked glance at the two men beside her. "This isn't over, Johnson," she spat before turning and hurrying back to the SUV, the officers trailing behind her. As the black vehicle peeled out of the driveway, the chief holstered his weapon and pulled his son into a tight embrace. "It's over, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe now." The boy clung to his father, his eyes shining with relief. And as the sirens drew closer, the chief couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. He had won this battle, and he knew that the war with the HOA was far from over.